Before we begin, dear viewer, a brief word. This is a work of fiction, crafted to entertain and perhaps illuminate certain truths about human connection, pride, and the quiet courage it takes to truly see another person. Any resemblance to real persons or events is purely coincidental. Now settle in, let us journey together into a world of drawing rooms and unspoken longing. Part 1. The Formality. The Duke of Winterbourne had never been a man given to sentimentality. At 32, Julian. Ashworth commanded respect in every salon from Mayfair to Edinburgh. His estate stretched across 3 counties. His investments had weathered the Napoleonic tumult with enviable steadiness, and his lineage could be traced, unbroken, to the conquest itself. He wore his title as others wore their skin, naturally, unconsciously, with the quiet assumption that it would always be there. Women found him handsome in that particular way, reserved for men who never seemed to notice their own appeal. Dark, hair, grey eyes the colour of winter skies, a jaw that suggested both strength and stubborn resolve. He danced adequately at balls, conversed with precision at dinners, and maintained a polite but impenetrable distance from anything resembling genuine emotion. It was, he believed, the proper way for a man of his station to conduct himself. The season of 1817 found him in Bath, attending to a rather tedious matter of property law that required his personal signature. The city, with its honey-coloured stone and endless parade of invalids seeking the waters, held little charm for him. He lodged at the Royal Crescent, conducted his business with characteristic efficiency, and planned to return to London within the fortnight. He had not anticipated Miss Eleanor Hartley. She arrived at his solicitor's office on a Tuesday morning in late April, accompanied by an elderly aunt who spent the entirety of the meeting examining her reticule as though it contained the secrets of the Orient. Miss Hartley herself was perhaps 25, dressed in a sensible grey walking dress that suggested modest circumstances without quite admitting to poverty. Her hair, a warm chestnut brown, was arranged simply. Her eyes were hazel, changeable, intelligent. She was there, it transpired, because her late father had once held a small parcel of land that bordered one of Winterbourne's lesser estates. Some ancient right-of-way was in dispute. The whole matter would likely be resolved, with a few pounds and a revised deed. "Your Grace," she said, rising as he entered. Her curtsy was correct, her tone respectful. "I apologize for the inconvenience. I'm certain this can be settled swiftly." He had nodded, barely looking at her. "Indeed, Miss Hartley. Mr. Pemberton has explained the situation. I see no reason for protracted negotiation." What struck him, though he would not acknowledge it then, not even to himself, was her composure. She did not simper. She did not flutter. She did not employ any of the tedious stratagems he had learned to expect from unmarried women in the presence of a duke. She simply stated her position, listened to his counter-proposal, and agreed to terms that were, he had to admit, eminently reasonable. "You are most generous, Your Grace," she said as they concluded. "My aunt and I are grateful. It is simple justice, Miss Hartley, nothing more." She had smiled then, a small fleeting thing that did not quite reach her eyes. "Of course, my lord." The phrase was perfectly appropriate. He was a duke. She was the daughter of a country gentleman of no particular consequence. The formality was not merely expected, but required. So why, he wondered later that evening as he dressed for dinner, had it sounded so much like a wall being built between them? He encountered her again 3 days later at the pump room. Winterbourne had gone there reluctantly, dragged by an old family friend who insisted the social aspect of Bath was its true medicinal property. He stood near one of the tall windows, holding a glass of the famous water and trying not to grimace at its mineral tang, when he saw her. She was walking slowly along the colonnade, her aunt beside her, both of them dressed in the kind of careful elegance that spoke of limited funds stretched as far as they would go. Eleanor, Miss Hartley, he corrected himself sternly, paused to greet an acquaintance, and he found himself watching the way she inclined her head, the small gestures of her gloved hands, the way sunlight caught in her hair. "Winterbourne, you're staring," his friend murmured. "I'm doing no such thing." And who is she?" "No one of consequence." But even as he said it, he felt the lie of it. There was something about her, a quality he could not name, a stillness that felt like strength rather than passivity. When their eyes met across the room, She acknowledged him with the same small, correct nod she had given him in Pemberton's office. "Your Grace," she said when he approached. He had not intended to approach. His feet had simply carried him there. "Miss Hartley, I trust you are well?" "Quite well, thank you, my lord." There it was again. My lord. Respectful, distant, entirely appropriate. He stayed talking with her and her aunt for perhaps 20 minutes. They discussed Bath's architecture, the latest novel from Mr. Scott, the unusually fine spring weather. Eleanor spoke thoughtfully, with a quick intelligence that showed itself in subtle ways. A wry observation here, an apt literary reference there. She never interrupted him, never contradicted him directly, but he had the distinct impression that she was forming her own opinions regardless of his pronouncements. When he finally took his leave, bowing over her hand in the prescribed manner, she smiled again. "A pleasure, Your Grace. Always, Your Grace. Always, my lord." The titles fell from her lips like rain, natural and inevitable, creating a space between them that seemed to grow wider each time they met. And they did meet, with increasing frequency over the following weeks. Bath, for all its sprawl, was still a finite place, and people of a certain standing moved in overlapping circles. They encountered each other at the lending library, at a musical hosted by Lady Pemberton, at a charity assembly where Winterbourne found himself bidding an absurd sum for a rather indifferent watercolor, simply because Eleanor had mentioned admiring the artist's use of light. He began to anticipate these meetings, to notice when she entered a room, to listen for the particular cadence of her voice in conversation. He told himself it was merely that she was more interesting than the usual run of Bath society. Nothing more. The evening that should have warned him came in mid-May. There was a concert at the assembly rooms, some Italian soprano whose name Winterbourne immediately forgot. He attended because his hostess had practically begged, and because he had nothing better to occupy his evening. Eleanor was there, seated 3 rows ahead with her aunt, her profile visible in the warm glow of the chandeliers. The soprano sang arias by Mozart and Handel, her voice soaring through the gilded room. Winterbourne barely heard her. He was watching the way Eleanor's hand rested on the arm of her chair, the slight tilt of her head as she listened, the small smile that touched her lips during a particularly lovely passage. During the interval, they found themselves in the same corner of the refreshment room, a coincidence that felt increasingly less coincidental with each passing week. "Are you enjoying the performance, my lord?" she asked. "It is accomplished," he said. A nothing answer, the kind he had perfected over years of social necessity. She looked at him then, really looked, as though she could see past the title and the careful manners to something underneath. "But does it move you?" The question caught him off guard. No one asked dukes whether they were moved. Dukes expressed measured approval or polite reservation. They did not admit to being affected by anything so common as emotion. "Music is meant to be appreciated for its technical merit," he said, falling back on familiar ground. "Is it?" Her tone was mild, but there was a challenge in her eyes. "I rather think music is meant to make us feel. Otherwise, why not simply read the score?" He should have offered some dismissive reply, should have changed the subject to safer territory. Instead, he heard himself say, "What does it make you feel, Miss Hartley?" She considered this, her gaze drifting toward the windows that overlooked the street. Outside, twilight was falling, painting the Bathstone in shades of amber and rose. "Longing," she said finally, "for something I cannot quite name, something just beyond reach." The words hung between them, fragile and dangerous. "That seems rather melancholic," he managed. "Perhaps. But there is beauty in melancholy, don't you think, Your Grace? A depth that happiness sometimes lacks. Your Grace." She used his title like punctuation, a reminder of the gulf between them that no amount of pleasant conversation could bridge. He wanted, suddenly and fiercely, to hear his name in her voice. Not Your Grace or my lord or any of the formal addresses that kept him at a distance. Just Julian, the man beneath the title. The thought disturbed him so profoundly that he made his excuses shortly thereafter and left the assembly rooms, walking back to his lodgings through the darkening streets with his mind in unusual turmoil. Have you ever met someone who unsettled you simply by being themselves? Someone whose presence made you question the careful walls you'd built around your heart? Think about that person for a moment. Did you let them in, or did you retreat further into your defenses? Winterbourne prided himself on self-discipline. For 3 days, he avoided the usual haunts where he might encounter Miss Hartley. He attended to his business, wrote letters, rode out into the countryside with single-minded determination. It was useless. On the 4th day, he found himself at the lending library, ostensibly seeking a particular volume on agricultural innovation. Eleanor was there, of course, standing in the poetry section with a book open in her hands. She looked up as he approached, and something flickered across her face. Pleasure, he thought, quickly masked. "Your Grace, I did not expect to see... You here?" "I might say the same, Miss Hartley." He glanced at the book in her hands. "Wordsworth?" "Yes. I find his observations on nature rather soothing. 'The world is too much with us,'" he quoted softly. Her eyes widened slightly. "You know his work?" "I am not entirely ignorant of literature, Miss Hartley, despite what my reputation might suggest." She smiled. A real smile this time, warm and unguarded. "I did not mean to imply otherwise, my lord. Forgive me." They stood there in the quiet library, surrounded by the musty scent of old books and the soft whisper of turning pages from other patrons. Rain had begun to fall outside, pattering against the tall windows. "Miss Hartley," he said, and then stopped, uncertain what he meant to say. "Yes, Your Grace." He wanted to tell her that he had been thinking of her, that her question about music had haunted him for days, that when he looked at her, he saw something that made all his careful control feel like a prison of his own making. Instead, he said, "I hope you enjoy your reading." "Thank you, my lord." As he left the library, the rain soaking through his coat, he wondered when he had become such a coward. The lesson arrived wrapped in the understated elegance of a calling card. Lady Catherine Pemberton was hosting a garden party, weather permitting, which in Bath meant weather hoping, and the Duke of Winterbourne was requested to attend. Eleanor Hartley's name appeared on the guest list as well, a fact Winterbourne noted with a mixture of anticipation and unease that he refused to examine too closely. The day proved fair, surprisingly so. Lady Pemberton's gardens were extensive, all winding paths and carefully tended roses, with a small folly at the far end that overlooked the valley below. Tables had been set up on the lawn, and servants moved among the guests with trays of refreshments. Winterbourne arrived punctually, paid his respects to his hostess, and immediately began scanning the crowd for a particular chestnut-haired figure in grey. He found her near the rose garden, speaking with a young curate whose earnest expression suggested he was either very devout or very smitten, probably both. Winterbourne approached with the careful casualness of a man who wanted to appear as though he had merely wandered in that direction, by chance. "Miss Hartley?" "Mr. Davies." He nodded to the curate, who stammered a greeting, and after a few moments of stilted conversation, excused himself with visible reluctance. "You frightened him away," Eleanor observed, amusement colouring her voice. "Have I? How unfortunate. Was it intentional, Your Grace?" He looked at her directly then, and found her watching him with an expression he could not quite read. "Would it trouble you if it were?" "That depends, my lord, on why you would wish to frighten away a perfectly harmless young man." The question hung between them, delicate and dangerous as spun glass. He could deflect it, make some light remark about the weather or the roses or anything else that would maintain the safe distance they had preserved until now. "Perhaps," he said slowly, "I wished to speak with you myself." Something changed in her eyes, a softening, a wariness. He could not tell which. "Then speak, Your Grace. I am listening." But what could he say? That he had thought of little else but her for weeks, that the formal distance she maintained drove him to distraction, that he wanted to know what made her laugh, what kept her awake at night, what she dreamed of when she allowed herself to dream. "The roses are particularly fine this year," he heard himself say instead. Her expression shifted, disappointment perhaps, or resignation. "Indeed they are, my lord." My lord. The wall rising again, brick by invisible brick. They walked together through the garden, maintaining the proper distance, speaking of inconsequential things. Anyone watching would have seen nothing unusual, a duke and a gentlewoman of modest means, engaged in polite conversation, exactly as society prescribed. No one would have noticed the way his hand clenched at his side when she laughed at something another gentleman said. No one would have seen the carefully neutral expression she wore whenever he reverted to his habitual formality. No one, that is, except the two people trapped within the performance. What we must understand here, dear viewer, is that silence can be its own form of dishonesty. The Duke's inability to speak his truth, to admit even to himself what he was beginning to feel, was not nobility. It was fear dressed in the respectable clothing of propriety. The afternoon wore on. Tea was served, then wine, then small cakes that no one seemed particularly interested in eating. The conversation flowed around them, gossip about London, speculation about the Regent's latest extravagance, mild concern about a late frost that might threaten the harvest. Winterbourne heard none of it. He was watching Eleanor speak with Lady Pemberton, noting the way she listened with genuine attention, the small gestures that suggested a thoughtful mind behind the polite facade. She looked up once and caught him staring. For a moment, their eyes held. Then she smiled, that small, careful smile he had come to recognize, and turned back to her conversation. It was that smile that undid him. He crossed the lawn with more haste than dignity, reaching her side just as Lady Pemberton excused herself to greet new arrivals. "Miss Hartley, might I have a word?" She looked surprised but nodded. "Of course, Your Grace." He led her toward the folly, away from the main gathering, his heart beating with unfamiliar urgency. The small structure provided shade and relative privacy, its columns framing a view of the valley that neither of them looked at. "I must speak plainly," he said, the words coming before he could think better of them. "Please do, my lord." And there it was again, the title, the formality, the careful distance. "Why do you do that?" he asked. "I beg your pardon?" "Address me always by my title, never my name. Always Your Grace or my lord, as though I were merely a rank and not a man." She blinked, clearly taken aback. "It is the proper form of address, Your Grace. I would not presume—" "Presume," he interrupted, shocking himself with his own vehemence. "For once, Miss Hartley, presume." Color rose in her cheeks. When she spoke, her voice was steady, but he heard something underneath. Something that might have been pain. "You ask me to presume, my lord, when you have given me no indication that such presumption would be welcome. We have exchanged pleasantries. We have discussed literature and music and all manner of safe topics. But you have never, not once, suggested that our acquaintance might be anything more than what society dictates. You are the Duke of Winterbourne. I am Miss Hartley of nowhere in particular. The forms exist for a reason. And if I tell you the forms are insufficient, then I would wonder, Your Grace, why it has taken you so long to say so." The truth of it struck him like a blow. She was right. He had hidden behind propriety, behind his title, behind every acceptable convention, all while resenting the very distance he himself had insisted upon. "Eleanor," her name felt strange on his tongue, intimate and terrifying. "Do not," she said quietly. "Do not speak my name if you mean to retreat behind your title again when we return to the others. I cannot bear it." He reached for her hand without thinking, and she let him take it, her gloved fingers trembling slightly in his. "I do not know how to do this," he admitted. "I do not know how to be anything other than what I have always been." "Then perhaps," she said, her eyes bright with unshed tears, "that is the truest thing you have said to me, my lord." She withdrew her hand gently and walked back toward the party, leaving him standing alone in the folly, the afternoon sun. Slanting through the columns and illuminating the wreckage of his carefully maintained control, Winterbourne remained there for several minutes, his thoughts in chaos. When he finally returned to the gathering, Eleanor was preparing to leave with her aunt. She curtsied to Lady Pemberton, offered her thanks, and departed without looking in his direction. He watched her go and felt for the first time the weight of all the words he had left unspoken. Part 2. The Aristocrat's Cage. The following. Morning brought rain, heavy, persistent, the kind that turned Bath's elegant streets into ribbons of grey and made the interior of Winterbourne's lodgings feel like a prison. He sat in his study, a book open before him, seeing none of the words. His mind circled endlessly back to the previous afternoon, to the look on Eleanor's face when she had asked him not to speak her name unless he meant it. unless he meant it. The question seemed simple enough on its surface. Did he mean it? Did he wish for something more than polite acquaintance with Miss Eleanor Hartley? The answer, he knew, was yes. Had been yes for weeks now, if he were honest with himself. But honesty had never been his strong suit, not when it came to matters of the heart. Julian Ashworth had learned early that emotion was a liability. His father, the previous Duke, had been a man of rigid principle and colder temperament. Love, in the Duke's estimation, was for poets and fools. Marriage was a matter of alliance, of bloodlines and property. One chose a suitable wife from a suitable family, produced heirs, and conducted the business of emotion, if one must have it, with appropriate discretion elsewhere. The previous Duchess had died when Julian was 12, a fall from a horse, quick and brutal and entirely without sentiment. His father had mourned in the correct fashion, worn black for the prescribed period, then remarried within 18 months to a woman half his age who produced no children and died, herself 4 years later, of a fever. Julian had watched it all from the careful distance his father insisted upon. Feelings, the Duke had told him repeatedly, were for the weak. A true gentleman mastered himself. So Julian had mastered himself, had learned to suppress every wayward emotion, every inconvenient attachment, until he could move through the world with perfect glacial control. It had served him well. Through Cambridge, through his early years in society, through the death of his father and his own ascension to the title, he had never been caught in scandal, never been made foolish by infatuation, never allowed himself to be vulnerable to another human being, until now. Until a woman with intelligent hazel eyes and a quiet voice had somehow slipped past every defense he possessed, simply by refusing to play the games he understood. The rain continued. Winterbourne paced his study like a caged animal, then forced himself to sit, to think clearly. What did he want? The answer came with uncomfortable clarity. He wanted to know her, truly know her, not the polite stranger who called him my lord and spoke in careful generalities, but the woman who read Wordsworth in lending libraries and found beauty in melancholy. He wanted to hear her opinions, her hopes, her fears. He wanted the right to speak her name without feeling as though he were crossing some forbidden boundary. He wanted, God help him, to matter to her as something more than a title. The realization should have terrified him. Instead, it felt like relief. He was reaching for paper and pen, intending to write to her, though what he would say he had no idea, when his butler entered with a card on a silver tray. "Mr. Edmund Hartley, Your Grace. He says he is Miss Eleanor Hartley's brother and that the matter is urgent." Winterbourne frowned. Eleanor had never mentioned a brother. "Show him in." The man who entered was perhaps 30, dressed in the uniform of a naval lieutenant. He had the same chestnut hair as his sister, though his eyes were darker, more guarded. He bowed correctly, but without excess deference. "Your Grace, forgive the intrusion. I am Edmund Hartley." "Mr. Hartley, please sit. You mentioned an urgent matter." The lieutenant remained standing. "I'll be brief, Your Grace. I've just arrived in Bath on unexpected leave. My sister mentioned in her letters that she had made your acquaintance." "She has," Winterbourne said carefully, "in relation to a property matter and subsequently in society." "Indeed." Edmund's jaw tightened. "My sister, Your Grace, is not in a position to protect herself from certain attentions. Our father left us with little beyond debts and a name. Eleanor has been living with our aunt on what amounts to charity. She is educated, accomplished, but she has no dowry, no connections, no hope of making what society would call a good match." Winterbourne felt heat rise in his chest, anger, though at whom he was not certain. "Mr. Hartley, I assure you my intentions toward your sister have been entirely honorable." "Have they been any intentions at all?" Edmund asked bluntly. "Or have you simply been amusing yourself with a woman who cannot afford to refuse the attentions of a duke?" The word struck home with devastating accuracy. Had that been what he was doing? Playing at connection while maintaining the safety of his emotional distance, knowing she could not call him to account? "You misunderstand the situation," he said, but even to his own ears it sounded weak. "Do I? My sister is proud, Your Grace. She would never speak of this herself, but I know her well enough to see that something, or someone, has upset her equilibrium. If you have been raising expectations, you have no intention of fulfilling." "I have made no promises," Winterbourne interrupted. No, you haven't, have you? Edmund's smile was sharp. Forgive me, Your Grace, but that is rather my point. If your acquaintance with my sister is merely a pleasant diversion during your time in Bath, I would ask you to end it now before she is hurt further. And if it is more than that, is it? The question hung between them, demanding an answer Winterbourne was not certain he could give. Not because he did not know his own feelings, but because speaking them aloud would require him to acknowledge them, to act upon them, to risk the very vulnerability he had spent a lifetime avoiding. Edmund watched him with the patient intensity of a man accustomed to waiting for answers. "I care for your sister," Winterbourne said finally, "more than is perhaps wise. Caring is easy, Your Grace. It costs nothing. What are you prepared to do about it?" Before Winterbourne could formulate an answer, Edmund continued, "My ship departs Portsmouth in 3 days. I sail for the Mediterranean and will be gone for at least a year. When I return, I expect to find my sister either happily settled or entirely free of whatever entanglement she has found herself in. I trust, Your Grace, that you understand my meaning." He bowed, correct and cold, and left before Winterbourne could respond. The Duke stood alone in his study, the rain drumming against the windows, and felt the weight of expectations he had never sought beginning to close around him. He did not see Eleanor for 2 days. When they finally encountered each other again, it was at a small gathering hosted by one of Bath's lesser hostesses, the kind of event Winterbourne would normally have avoided, but attended now with the specific hope of seeing her. She was standing near the pianoforte, listening to a young lady murder a Beethoven sonata with more enthusiasm than skill. She wore a dress of pale blue muslin, simple and elegant, and she did not look in his direction when he entered. Winterbourne made his way through the requisite greetings, accepted the inevitable glass of indifferent wine, and positioned himself where she could not easily avoid him. When the sonata finally ended, to everyone's relief, he suspected, he approached. "Miss Hartley." "Your Grace." Her curtsy was correct, her tone neutral. She did not meet his eyes. "Might I speak with you?" "I believe we are speaking, my lord." The use of his title stung more than it should have. "Privately, I meant." "I think not, Your Grace. It would hardly be proper." Now she did look at him, and he saw something in her expression that made his chest tighten. Not anger, precisely. Something closer to resignation. "Eleanor, please do not." Her voice was quiet, barely audible above the chatter of the room. "Please do not make this more difficult than it already is." "I met your brother," he said, abandoning pretense. Her eyes widened slightly. "Edmund is in Bath. He called upon me. He was concerned. He had no right." 2 spots of color appeared high on her cheeks. "Whatever he said to you, Your Grace, please know that I did not ask him to intercede. He cares for you, as do I." "Do you?" The words were soft but cut like a blade. "Do you truly, my lord? Or do you simply enjoy the novelty of a woman who does not fawn over your title?" Others were beginning to glance in their direction. Winterbourne became aware that they were providing entertainment of a sort that would fuel Bath's gossip mills for weeks. "This is not the place for this conversation," he said tightly. "Then perhaps there is no place for it at all." She moved to step past him, but he caught her arm, gently, but enough to stop her. "Eleanor, please." For a moment she simply looked at his hand on her sleeve. When she raised her eyes to his, they were bright with unshed tears. "Let me go, Your Grace." He released her immediately and watched as she walked away, her head high, her spine straight. She collected her aunt with quiet efficiency and departed, leaving him standing alone in the middle of the drawing room with the accumulated weight of Bath society's speculation pressing down upon him. Here we see a truth worth carrying with you. Pride is not the same as strength. The Duke's pride kept him silent when he should have spoken, distant when he should have drawn near. How often do we confuse the two in our own lives? How often do we mistake our fear of vulnerability for dignity? That night, Winterbourne could not sleep. He lay in his bed staring at the ceiling, replaying every conversation he had ever had with Eleanor, every missed opportunity, every moment when he might have been honest and chose safety. Instead, he thought of his father's cold lessons about mastering one's emotions, about the proper way for a duke to conduct himself, about the dangers of attachment, and he thought of Eleanor's face when she had asked him to let her go. Somewhere in the dark hours before dawn, Julian Ashworth made a decision. He would not be his father. He would not spend his life moving through the world with perfect control and perfect isolation. If he had to choose between the safety of emotional distance and the terrifying uncertainty of honest feeling, he would choose the latter, even if it meant risking rejection, even if it meant making himself vulnerable in ways he had sworn never to permit. He would find a way to show Eleanor that she mattered, that this was more than novelty or idle amusement, that when he spoke her name, he meant it with everything he had. The how of it he would discover, but the why was suddenly, devastatingly clear, because a life without her in it had begun to feel like no life at all. Part 3. The Rival. Winterbourne's resolution, forged in the sleepless hours of the night, proved more difficult to execute in the harsh light of day. For one thing, Eleanor was avoiding him. Oh, she managed it with perfect subtlety. There were no obvious snubs, no public cuts that might cause scandal. She simply became unavailable. When he called at her lodgings, she was out walking. When he attended events where he knew she would be present, she was always on the opposite side of the room, always engaged in conversation with someone else, always moving away just as he began to approach. Her brother had departed for Portsmouth. Her aunt, when Winterbourne encountered her at the pump room, was politely vague about Eleanor's activities and determinedly unhelpful regarding any possibility of arranging a private meeting. A week passed in this manner. Then, too, Winterbourne found himself in the unusual position of being thwarted at every turn, and the experience grated on him more than he cared to admit. He was accustomed to having his wishes accommodated, his desires anticipated. The simple act of securing 10 minutes of private conversation should not have been this difficult. Unless, of course, the lady in question did not wish to grant him those 10 minutes. The thought sat uneasily in his mind, a constant weight that made everything else seem trivial by comparison. It was at Lady Pemberton's musical evening, a larger, more formal affair than her garden party, that Winterbourne's careful plans fell apart entirely. The evening began well enough. He arrived fashionably late, paid his respects to his hostess, and immediately began scanning the assembled guests for Eleanor. He found her standing near one of the tall windows, dressed in a gown of deep rose silk that he suspected had been modified from something older, but looked lovely nonetheless. She was not alone. The gentleman with her was perhaps 40, well dressed in the manner of someone with significant means if not actual nobility. Tall, fair-haired, with the kind of easy smile that suggested he had never encountered a problem he could not charm his way through. He was speaking animatedly, and Eleanor was listening with what appeared to be genuine interest. As Winterbourne watched, the gentleman said something that made her laugh, a real laugh, open and unguarded in a way he had never managed to inspire. Something cold and sharp twisted in his chest. He made his way across the room, with deliberate casualness, arriving at Eleanor's side just as the fair-haired gentleman paused for breath. "Miss Hartley, good evening." Her smile faded fractionally. "Your Grace, may I present Mr. Thomas Ashford? He has recently taken a house on the Royal Crescent. Mr. Ashford, the Duke of Winterbourne." Ashford bowed. "Your Grace, an honor." Winterbourne returned the bow with the bare minimum of civility. "Ashford, I don't believe we've met in London. I spend most of my time in the north." "Your Grace, my family has interests in wool and cotton, but I confess Bath has proven unexpectedly delightful." His eyes moved to Eleanor as he said this, and his meaning could not have been clearer if he had shouted it. "Indeed," Winterbourne said flatly. "Miss Hartley, might I have a word?" "Mr. Ashford and I were just discussing the program for this evening," Eleanor said, her tone pleasant but firm. "I understand there is to be a quartet by Haydn." "I look forward to it," Ashford said, warmly. "In fact, Miss Hartley, I was hoping you might allow me to secure you a seat where the acoustics are particularly favorable. Unless, of course, you have other arrangements." She hesitated, and in that hesitation, Winterbourne saw the shape of his own failure. He had pushed her away with his silence and his pride, and now here was another man, more open in his admiration, more willing to show his regard publicly. "That would be most kind, Mr. Ashford," Eleanor said quietly. Winterbourne stood there watching as Ashford offered his arm and Eleanor took it, watching as they moved together toward the seating area, watching as the distance between them grew with each step. Lady Pemberton appeared at his elbow. "Close your mouth, Winterbourne. You look like a stunned cod." He did close his mouth, but could not quite manage to look away from the sight of Eleanor seated beside Ashford, their heads inclined toward each other in easy conversation. "Who is he?" Winterbourne asked. "Thomas Ashford. Very wealthy. Widower, no children, perfectly respectable. He arrived in Bath a fortnight ago and has been quite attentive to our dear Miss Hartley." Lady Pemberton gave him a knowing look. "Of course, if a certain duke had been more attentive himself." "I have been attentive," he said, hearing the defensiveness in his own voice. "Have you?" "To an outside observer, Your Grace, it has looked rather more like studied indifference punctuated by occasional brooding stares." "I do? Not brood. Of course not, my mistake." She patted his arm with what might have been sympathy or mockery. "The quartet is about to begin. Do try to enjoy it." Winterbourne found a seat with a clear view of Eleanor, then spent the next 45 minutes in exquisite torture. The Haydn was lovely. He heard perhaps 3 notes of it. Instead, he watched Eleanor's profile in the candlelight, watched the small smile that played at her lips during the more playful passages, watched the way Ashford leaned closer during the interval to murmur some comment that made her cover her mouth to hide a laugh. Have you ever watched someone you care for laugh with someone else and felt your heart crack just a little? That bitter mix of jealousy and regret, knowing you had your chance and failed to take it? Perhaps you're thinking now of your own moment, your own loss. It's a particular kind of pain, isn't it? When the performance concluded, Winterbourne moved with uncharacteristic haste to reach Eleanor before Ashford could monopolize her entirely. He succeeded barely, intercepting her as she rose from her seat. "Miss Hartley, a moment, please." She looked at him with an expression he could not read. "Your Grace, walk with me, just for a moment. I really should, please." Something in his voice must have reached her, because she nodded fractionally and allowed him to lead her toward the terrace doors. They stepped out into the cool evening air, the sounds of conversation fading behind them. Bath spread below them, its windows glowing with warm light against the darkness. A half-moon hung in the clear sky. "What is it you wish to say to me, Your Grace?" Eleanor asked. She kept her eyes on the view, not on him. "Everything," he thought. "Nothing. I'm sorry. Don't smile at him that way. Look at me the way you looked at him. Give me another chance." What he said was, "Who is Thomas Ashford to you?" She did look at him then, and there was something like pity in her eyes. "He is a gentleman who has shown me kindness and attention, nothing more." As yet, she agreed quietly. "Eleanor," her name felt like a prayer on his lips. "Do you know what the difference is between you and Mr. Ashford?" she interrupted. "He speaks to me. He asks my opinions and actually listens to the answers. He remembers things I have said in previous conversations. He treats me as though I am a person worthy of his time and genuine interest, not merely a pleasant diversion during a dull stay in Bath." "That is not fair," Winterbourne said, stung. "Is it not? Tell me, Your Grace, what is my favorite novel? What instrument did I study as a child? What do I miss most about my father?" When he could not answer, she nodded. "Mr. Ashford knows these things. He has known them for less than a fortnight because he bothered to ask." "I care for you," Winterbourne said desperately. "Perhaps you do, but caring without action is just another form of silence, my lord, and I have had enough of silence." She turned to go, but he caught her hand, holding it gently but firmly. "If I could go back," he said, the words pouring out in a rush, "if I could undo every moment I wasted in pride and fear, I would. I would tell you that I think of you constantly, that I have tried and failed to stop, that the sound of you calling me my lord is both music and agony, because it means you're near, but still impossibly far. I would tell you that I am a fool who has been taught all. His life, that emotion is weakness, and that you have shown me the weakness lies in refusing to feel at all." Her eyes were bright with tears. "Why now? Why, when there is someone else paying me the attentions you could not be bothered to?" "Because I am losing you," he said simply, "and I find I cannot bear it." For a long moment, she simply looked at him, her hand still in his. He could feel the flutter of her pulse, quick and uncertain. "My lord," she said finally, gently extracting her hand from his. "I think you are losing something you never truly tried to claim." She walked back inside, leaving him alone on the terrace with his 2 late confessions and the cold comfort of the bath night. Winterbourne did not sleep that night either. He sat in his study, a decanter of brandy at his elbow, and forced himself to acknowledge several uncomfortable truths. First, he had failed Eleanor at every turn, had been too cautious, too proud, too bound by the lessons of a childhood that taught him to fear vulnerability above all else. Second, Thomas Ashford, whatever his motives, was giving Eleanor what she deserved: genuine attention, respect, the simple dignity of being treated as though her thoughts and feelings mattered. Third, if Winterbourne did not find some way to prove, not merely speak, but prove that he had changed, he would lose her entirely, and she would be right to let him go. The question was how. Words had failed him. Words were cheap, easily spoken, and just as easily forgotten. He needed action. He needed to show her that he understood what he had done wrong and was willing to be different. But how did a duke, trained from birth to maintain emotional distance, prove he could be close? How did a man who had never let anyone past his defenses show he was willing to tear those defenses down? He drank his brandy and watched the sun rise over Bath, no closer to an answer. The following days were perhaps the most difficult of Winterbourne's life. He saw Eleanor frequently. Bath society ensured that, but always in the company of others, and increasingly often in the company of Thomas Ashford. The man was persistent. Winterbourne had to give him that. And worse, he was likable. Even Winterbourne, predisposed to loathe him, could find no legitimate fault in his behavior. Ashford was attentive without being presumptuous, generous without being showy. He made Eleanor laugh. He listened when she spoke. He brought her books he thought she would enjoy, and remembered her preference for tea over coffee. He was, in short, everything Winterbourne had failed to be. The realization sat like lead in Winterbourne's stomach. There was a promenade concert in Sydney Gardens on a particularly fine afternoon. Half of Bath society attended, spreading across the lawns with picnic baskets and parasols. Winterbourne went because Eleanor would be there, and because he could not seem to stay away, despite knowing it would only cause him pain. He found her beneath a copper beech tree, seated on a blanket with her aunt and inevitably Thomas Ashford. They were laughing at something, the three of them, a picture of easy companionship. Winterbourne stood at a distance, watching. An observer might have thought him cold, detached. No one could have seen the way his hands clenched at his sides, the way his jaw tightened when Ashford leaned closer to point out something in the book Eleanor was holding. Winterbourne. He turned to find Lady Pemberton beside him, her expression unusually serious. "You're torturing yourself." "I am observing. You're standing here like a statue in a graveyard, staring at a woman you could have had if you'd possessed the courage to reach for her when you had the chance." He flinched. "Thank you, Lady Pemberton. Your compassion is overwhelming." "Compassion won't help you now. Honesty might." She studied him with shrewd eyes. "The question is whether you're capable of it." Before he could respond, she had moved away, leaving him with the accusation hanging in the air. Capable of honesty. Was he? Could he strip away all the careful layers of ducal dignity and aristocratic reserve and simply tell Eleanor the truth? Not the polished, acceptable version of the truth, but the raw, messy reality of it? The thought terrified him, but watching Eleanor smile at another man terrified him more. He made his decision. The opportunity came 2 days later. There was to be a small gathering at the assembly rooms, cards and conversation, nothing formal. Winterbourne learned through careful inquiry that Eleanor would be attending. He arrived early and positioned himself where he could intercept her before Ashford inevitably appeared. She entered with her aunt, dressed in a gown of soft green that made her eyes look more golden than brown. She saw him immediately, and he watched the swift play of emotions across her face. Surprise, wariness, something that might have been longing quickly suppressed. He crossed to her before she could retreat. "Miss Hartley, Mrs. Hartley." He bowed to the aunt, who sniffed but did not cut him, which he took as encouraging. "Might I have a word with your niece?" The aunt looked at Eleanor, who nodded fractionally. "The terrace," Eleanor said quietly. Briefly. They walked in silence through the assembly rooms, past the card tables and clusters of conversation, out onto the terrace that overlooked the street. The evening was mild, the air soft with the promise of summer. "I do not have much time," Eleanor said without preamble. "Mr. Ashford will be arriving soon." "Of course he will," Winterbourne said, unable to keep the bitterness from his voice. Your Grace, if you brought me out here merely to express your displeasure— No, I brought you here because I need you to understand something, and I am running out of ways to show you. She waited, her expression guarded. Winterbourne took a breath and abandoned every lesson his father had ever taught him about ducal composure. I have been afraid, he said. My entire life I have been taught that emotion is weakness, that attachment is dangerous, that a man of my station must never allow himself to be vulnerable. My father believed this absolutely, and he raised me to believe it too, and so I learned to keep everyone at a distance, to feel nothing or at least to show nothing, to protect myself by never letting anyone close enough to hurt me. Eleanor's expression had softened fractionally, but she said, Nothing. And then I met you, Winterbourne continued, and for the first time in my life all that careful control began to crumble. You made me want things I had convinced myself I didn't need. Connection, understanding, the simple comfort of being known by another person. And it terrified me, Eleanor. It terrified me so much that I retreated into formality and distance and all the old familiar defenses. I know, she said quietly. I saw it happening. I have watched you with Ashford. I have watched him give you what I could not. Openness, attention, the dignity of being genuinely seen, and I have hated him for it while knowing he is doing nothing more than what I should have done from the beginning. The words were coming faster now, rough and unpolished. You asked me once what music makes me feel. I could not answer you then because I had spent so long not allowing myself to feel anything. But the truth is that music, all of it, every note, makes me think of you now. It makes me feel longing for something just beyond reach. It makes me feel the ache of wanting and the terror of admitting to want. Tears were sliding down Eleanor's cheeks, but she did not look away. I cannot promise I will not fail you again, Winterbourne said. I cannot promise I will suddenly transform into a man who finds emotional honesty easy, but I can promise that I will try, that I will keep trying every day to be worthy of the gift of your regard, if you will give me the chance. Silence stretched between them. Below on the street a carriage clattered past. Somewhere in the assembly rooms someone laughed. Julian, Eleanor said, and hearing his name from her lips felt like absolution and damnation all at once. I want to believe you. I want to believe this is real and not simply a response to someone else showing interest. But how can I trust that you won't retreat again the moment you feel safe? You can't, he said honestly. I'm asking you to take a leap of faith based on nothing more than my word and my intention. It is not enough. I know it is not enough. No, she agreed, it isn't. His heart, which had been beating with painful hope, seemed to stop entirely. But, she continued, and he heard the hesitation in her voice, perhaps it is a beginning. Eleanor? No, she said firmly. No promises, no grand declarations. If you truly mean this, Julian, then prove it. Not with words, but with actions. Show me over time that you have changed. Earn the trust you're asking for. I will, he said. I swear to you I will. She reached up and touched his cheek gently, a fleeting gesture that sent warmth flooding through him. Then I will wait and see. But I make no promises either, my lord. Mr. Ashford has been kind, and I will not cut him simply because you have finally decided to be honest. It was not the answer he wanted, but it was more than he deserved. I understand. They stood together in the mild evening, the sounds of Bath society drifting. Around them, both of them knowing that everything had changed and nothing had been resolved. When they returned inside, Thomas Ashford was waiting. Part 4. The Shattered Pride. The following weeks tested Winterbourne's resolution in ways he had not anticipated. True to her word, Eleanor did not cut Ashford's attentions. The man continued his polite courtship with the steady persistence of water wearing away stone, and Eleanor, while not precisely encouraging him, did not discourage him either. Winterbourne, meanwhile, discovered that proving oneself through actions rather than words was considerably more difficult than simply making promises. He began with small things. When he encountered Eleanor at the pump room, he asked about her reading and remembered what she said. When they met at a soiree, he sought her opinion on the music and listened rather than offering his own pronouncements. He brought her a volume of poetry he thought she would enjoy, not as a grand gesture, but as a simple gift between friends. He learned her favorite color, a particular shade of sage green, her childhood fear of thunderstorms, the way she worried about her brother at sea. He discovered she played pianoforte but had no instrument in her lodgings, and arranged anonymously through Lady Pemberton for one to be delivered. These were not grand gestures. They were quiet demonstrations of attention, of care, of genuine interest in who she was, beyond the barriers of formality and title. Eleanor received them with cautious warmth, neither encouraging nor rejecting his efforts. She was, he realized, waiting to see if his resolve would hold, and it might have, if not for the dinner party at the Hendersons' house. Sir Marcus Henderson was a baronet of moderate wealth and immoderate self-importance, the sort of man who collected titled guests the way others collected snuff boxes. His invitation had been pressing enough that Winterbourne could not easily refuse without giving offence. He arrived to find the usual Bath society assembled in Henderson's over-decorated drawing room. Eleanor was there, of course, seated beside her aunt and across from Thomas Ashford. She wore a gown of pale gold silk, borrowed or modified from something older, he suspected, but lovely nonetheless, and she greeted him with careful politeness when he paid his respects. The dinner itself was adequate, if uninspired. Winterbourne found himself seated between Lady Henderson, who talked incessantly about her eldest daughter's prospects, and a Colonel Somebody who had served in Spain and could speak of nothing else. Eleanor was seated further down the table, between Ashford and a young curate who blushed every time she looked at him. Winterbourne watched her navigate the conversation with practiced grace, drawing out the curate's stammering observations about Bath's architecture while deftly managing Ashford's more pointed attentions. It was during the third course that disaster struck. Lady Henderson, having exhausted the topic of her daughter, turned her attention to broader social matters. "Tell me, Your Grace," she said in a carrying voice, "is it true you are considering a return to London soon? I had heard your business in Bath was concluded." "I have not yet determined my schedule," Winterbourne said neutrally. "Ah, but surely you cannot linger here much longer. A man of your position has obligations, after all. The season in London, the management of your estates." She lowered her voice conspiratorially, though not enough to prevent half the table from hearing. "And of course there is the matter of securing the succession. Your late father, God rest him, would surely wish to see the line continued." Winterbourne felt every muscle in his body tense. "My father's wishes are not a matter for dinner-table speculation." Of course not," Lady Henderson fluttered, missing or ignoring his tone. "I merely meant that a duke has certain responsibilities. Marriage, children, the continuation of the bloodline. It would not do to daily overlong in a place like Bath, when there are suitable young ladies in London far more appropriate to your station." The implication was clear and devastatingly public. Whatever Eleanor might be, whatever qualities she might possess, she was not suitable for a duke. She was the daughter of an impoverished gentleman, with no fortune and no connections. A pleasant diversion, perhaps, but nothing more. Winterbourne saw Eleanor's face go carefully blank, saw the way her hand tightened on her fork, saw Ashford lean closer to murmur something that might have been comfort. He should have defended her, should have said something cutting and final that would put Lady Henderson in her place and make clear that Eleanor's worth had nothing to do with her birth or her fortune. Instead, what came out of his mouth was, "Lady Henderson, perhaps we might discuss the pleasures of Bath's architecture, rather than my private affairs." It was meant to deflect, to change the subject, to protect Eleanor from further speculation, but what it sounded like, what everyone at that table heard, was agreement. Polite, aristocratic agreement that yes, of course, a duke could not seriously consider someone of Eleanor's station, that whatever his dalliance in Bath had been, it was temporary and inconsequential. The conversation moved on. Someone mentioned the upcoming assembly. The colonel launched into another tale of military glory. The dinner continued as though nothing had happened, but Winterbourne saw the way Eleanor's smile never reached her eyes for the rest of the evening, saw the way she avoided looking in his direction, saw the way Ashford's attention became more pointed, more proprietary, as though sensing weakness in a rival. When the ladies withdrew, leaving the men to their port, Winterbourne sat in a fog of self-recrimination. He had failed her again. When given the opportunity to publicly acknowledge what she meant to him, to defend her against precisely the kind of casual cruelty that society specialized in, He had retreated into safe, meaningless platitudes. A duke has certain responsibilities. His father's voice, echoing through the years. Emotion is weakness. Control is strength. Never allow yourself to be vulnerable. He had broken his word without even realizing he was doing it. Consider this moment carefully. How often do we fail the people we care for, not through grand betrayals, but through small silences? Through the things we should say but don't, the defenses we should make but won't, the courage we should show but can't quite manage. Winterbourne's failure here was not dramatic. It was quiet, polite, socially acceptable, and it cut deeper than any dramatic rejection could have. The evening ended. Winterbourne made his farewells with mechanical courtesy and returned to his lodgings in a state of barely suppressed fury. At Lady Henderson, at society's casual cruelties, but mostly at himself. He should go to Eleanor immediately, should explain, apologize, make her understand that his silence had been cowardice, not agreement. But it was late, improper, and he had already done enough damage for one night. He would call on her tomorrow. First thing, he would make this right. The note arrived before breakfast. It was brief, written in Eleanor's clear, elegant hand. Your Grace, I believe our acquaintance has run its course. I thank you for the kindnesses you have shown me during your time in Bath, and I wish you well in all your future endeavors. Please do not call upon me again. Miss Eleanor Hartley Winterbourne read it 3 times, each reading like a fresh blow. She had not even signed it. Eleanor. She had retreated into the formality he had taught her so well, behind the walls of Your Grace and Miss Hartley that he himself had built between them. And she had ended it. Cleanly, finally, with the quiet dignity that characterized everything she did. He should accept it, should let her go. A gentleman would respect her wishes and withdraw with grace. Instead, he found himself standing outside her lodgings an hour later, knowing he had no right to be there, unable to be anywhere else. The servant who answered looked uncomfortable. I'm sorry, Your Grace, but Miss Hartley is not receiving callers. Please, Winterbourne said, abandoning pride entirely. Please tell her I only need a moment. She was quite clear, Your Grace. She is not receiving callers. Any callers. He stood there on the doorstep, holding Eleanor's note, and felt the full weight of what he had lost. Will you at least give her a message? The servant hesitated, then nodded. Tell her. Winterbourne stopped, searching for words that might penetrate the distance between them. Tell her I am sorry. Tell her I was a coward when I should have been brave, and I understand if she cannot forgive me. But tell her I will not stop trying. To be worthy of what she offered me, even if she never sees me again. The servant looked distinctly uncomfortable with this level of emotional confession. I'll tell her, Your Grace. The door closed. Winterbourne walked back through Bath's elegant streets, the morning sun mocking him with its cheerfulness, and wondered how he had managed to destroy the best thing in his life through simple, stupid fear. The days that followed were among the bleakest Winterbourne could remember. He saw Eleanor. Occasionally, Bath society ensured continued proximity, but she no longer acknowledged him beyond the bare minimum of civility. A nod in passing, a brief curtsy if they happened to be in the same room. Her eyes would slide past him as though he were a piece of furniture, present but inconsequential. Thomas Ashford, meanwhile, became a constant presence at her side. Winterbourne heard through the gossip channels, which he now monitored with shameful dedication, that Ashford had declared his intentions, that he had spoken with Eleanor's aunt, that an understanding, if not a formal engagement, was expected soon. The news should have galvanized him to action. Instead, it paralyzed him. What right did he have to interfere? He had shown Eleanor exactly what kind of man he was, someone who cared more for social approval than for her dignity, who would retreat into silence when courage was needed, who could not be trusted to stand beside her when it mattered. Ashford, by contrast, had been steadfast, public in his admiration, willing to declare his regard regardless of social opinion. Ashford deserved her. Winterbourne did not. The logic was unassailable. It did nothing to ease the ache that had taken up permanent residence in his chest. He was preparing to return to London. There seemed no point in remaining in Bath, when Lady Pemberton cornered him at the lending library. Running away, are we? I'm attending to my estates, he said stiffly. You're fleeing like a wounded animal, and we both know it. She studied him with shrewd eyes. Have you spoken to her? She does not wish to speak with me. Have you tried? She made her wishes clear. Julian Ashworth, Lady Pemberton said, using his given name with the familiarity of long acquaintance. You are without question the most intelligent fool I have ever encountered. That girl loves you. Anyone with eyes can see it. She has a curious way of showing it then. Because you gave her no choice. You proved to her in front of half of Bath society that you care more for your reputation than for her heart. What did you expect? That she would simply accept your apologies and trust that you had changed when your actions demonstrated precisely the opposite? The accusation hit home because it was true. What would you have me do? He asked tiredly. She will not see me. She is, from all accounts, preparing to accept another man's proposal. I have no claim on her, no right to interfere. You have every right if you love her. I never said, oh please, you are so obviously desperately in love with that woman that watching you is like watching a Greek tragedy performed by particularly stubborn actors. Lady Pemberton poked him in the chest with one bony finger. The question is whether you love her enough to actually fight for her. Not with words, not with apologies, but with the kind of grand, terrifying gesture that proves beyond doubt that you have changed. What sort of gesture? That, my dear Duke, is for you to determine, but I would suggest you do it quickly. Ashford is planning to propose at the Assembly tomorrow night. Publicly. Very romantic, or so he has told anyone who will listen. Winterbourne felt as though the ground had shifted beneath his feet. Tomorrow night. He had until tomorrow night to find some way to prove he had changed, to show Eleanor that his love was real and worth the risk. 24 hours to overcome a lifetime of training in emotional restraint. 24 hours to become a different man. Thank you, he said to Lady Pemberton. Don't thank me, just don't make a hash of it. I've grown fond of you both, and I should hate to see you spend the rest of your lives in noble, separate misery. She swept away, leaving him standing among the bookshelves with the weight of impossible expectation pressing down on him. What did one do? How did one make a grand gesture that was genuine rather than theatrical, meaningful rather than manipulative? He thought of his father, who had believed grand gestures were for the weak-minded, who had valued control and composure above all else. And he thought of Eleanor, who had asked him what music made him feel and had deserved honesty instead of evasion. Perhaps that was the answer. Not something showy or dramatic, but something true. Something that stripped away every defense and left only the raw, honest truth of what he felt. It would require more courage than he was certain he possessed. But the alternative, a life without Eleanor, watching her build happiness with someone else, was unthinkable. Winterbourne left the library with a plan forming in his mind. It was terrifying. It would likely fail. It would certainly expose him to ridicule and rejection. But it was all he had. Part 5. The Reckoning. The assembly room was crowded, more so than usual, as word of Ashford's planned proposal had leaked through Bath society's gossip channels. People loved a romantic spectacle, particularly when it involved someone as wealthy and eligible as Thomas Ashford and someone as sympathetic as Eleanor Hartley. Winterbourne arrived early, his heart hammering with an anxiety he had not felt since he was a boy facing his father's judgment. He wore evening dress impeccably tailored as always, but his hands shook slightly as he adjusted his cravat. He had not slept, had spent the entire night writing, revising, discarding, writing again. The result rested in his pocket now, a few pages of his own handwriting, no longer perfect but honest in a way he had never managed before. Eleanor arrived with her aunt shortly after 8, and Winterbourne's breath caught at the sight of her. She wore a gown of deep blue silk, new, he thought, perhaps purchased with Ashford's assistance, and her hair was dressed with pearl combs that caught the light. She looked beautiful and distant and utterly beyond his reach. Ashford was there immediately, offering his arm, leading her toward the dance floor. They moved together with the ease of people who had danced before, who understood each other's rhythms. Winterbourne watched from the periphery, waiting for his moment. Several acquaintances attempted conversation, but he barely heard them. His entire being was focused on Eleanor, on the plan he had made, on the terror of what he was about to do. The dancing continued. Midnight approached. And then, during a pause between sets, as the room settled into conversation and refreshment, Thomas Ashford stepped to the center of the floor. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying easily, "I hope you will forgive the interruption, but I find I cannot wait any longer to share my happiness with you all." A ripple of anticipation moved through the crowd. Eleanor, standing beside her aunt, had gone pale. "Miss Eleanor Hartley," Ashford continued, turning to her with a smile, "has done me the extraordinary honor of allowing me to know her these past weeks. She is everything a man could wish for. Intelligent, gracious, kind. And so I would ask her now before all these witnesses to do me the even greater honor of becoming my wife." He dropped to one knee, producing a ring that glittered in the chandelier light. The room held its collective breath. Eleanor looked at Ashford, then at the assembled crowd, then down at her own hands. When she spoke, her voice was quiet but clear. "Mr. Ashford, I am deeply sensible of the honor you do me. Don't." The word cut through the room like a blade. Winterbourne had moved forward without conscious thought, pushing through the crowd until he stood at the edge of the dance floor. Every eye turned to him. "Your Grace?" Ashford had risen, his expression somewhere between confusion and anger. "This is highly irregular, I know," Winterbourne said. "I apologize, Ashford. You are a better man than I, and you deserve better than this interruption. But I will not remain silent while Eleanor accepts a proposal from someone she does not love." Eleanor's eyes were wide, shocked. "Julian, please," he said, looking only at her. "Please let me speak, just this once. And then, if you wish me to leave, I will go and never trouble you again." The room was utterly silent. Winterbourne could hear his own heartbeat, loud in his ears, as he took the pages from his pocket. "I am the Duke of Winterbourne," he began, and his voice shook slightly but held. "And I have been a duke all my life. My father raised me to believe that emotion was weakness, that vulnerability was failure, that a man of my station must never allow himself to be anything less than perfectly controlled." He paused, looking down at the words he had written. They seemed inadequate now, pale shadows of what he needed to say, but they were all he had. "I learned those lessons well. I learned to keep everyone at a distance, to feel nothing, or at least show nothing, to protect myself by never allowing anyone close enough to matter." His eyes found Eleanor's across the room. She was crying, silent tears sliding down her cheeks, but she did not look away. "And then I met you, Eleanor Hartley, and every defense I had built over 32 years began to crumble. You made me want things I had convinced myself were impossible: connection, understanding, the simple, terrifying gift of being truly known by another person." Someone in the crowd shifted uncomfortably. This level of public emotion was shocking, inappropriate for a duke. Winterbourne did not care. "I failed you," he continued. "Again and again I chose pride over honesty, formality over feeling, the safety of distance over the risk of love. At the Hendersons' dinner, when I should have defended you, I was silent, not because I agreed with what was implied, but because I was too much a coward to contradict the very society I had been raised to value above all else." He took a step closer, still holding the pages, but no longer reading from them. "You asked me once, what music makes me feel? I could not answer you then. But the truth is that music, all of it, everything I hear, makes me feel the ache of wanting you and the terror of losing you. It makes me feel the weight of every word I left unspoken, every moment I wasted in fear." Ashford had stepped back, his expression unreadable. The assembled guests might have been statues for all the notice Winterbourne gave them. "I am asking you now, in front of all these people, not to marry Thomas Ashford. Not because I have any right to ask, not because I deserve your consideration after how I have treated you, but because I love you, Eleanor. I love you with everything I am and everything I will ever be. And I cannot stand here and watch you build a life with someone else without at least telling you the truth." Eleanor's hand had gone to her mouth. Fresh tears spilled over. "If you choose Ashford," Winterbourne said, his voice breaking slightly, "I will accept it. He is a good man, and he will make you happy in ways I may never manage. But if there is any part of you that still feels for me what I feel for you, then I am asking you to give me one more chance. Not to promise me forever, but just to allow me to prove, over time and through actions rather than words, that I can be the man you deserve." He folded the pages and tucked them away. When he looked at Eleanor again, it was without any shield or defense, just a man looking at the woman he loved with his entire heart, visible in his eyes. "I love you," he said simply, "and I will keep loving you whether you say yes or no. But I had to tell you. I had to speak while I still could before it was too late." The silence that followed was absolute. Eleanor stood frozen, tears streaming down her face, her hands clasped before her. She looked at Ashford, who gave her a small, sad smile and an almost imperceptible nod. Permission to choose as her heart directed. Then she looked at Winterbourne, and he saw everything. He needed to know in her eyes before she spoke a word. "You absolute fool," she said, her voice shaking with emotion. "You impossible, stubborn, infuriating fool." She crossed the dance floor in a rush, propriety abandoned, and Winterbourne caught her in his arms as she reached him. They stood there, holding each other while Bath society looked on in scandalized fascination, and nothing else mattered. "I have loved you since the day you quoted Wordsworth in the lending library," she whispered, against his chest. "Since the moment you looked at me as though I were a person, rather than merely a woman of inadequate station. And I have been so angry at you for making me love you, and then retreating behind your title and your pride." "I know," he said, pressing his lips to her hair. "I know, and I am sorry. I am so desperately sorry." She pulled back to look at him, her hands framing his face. "If you ever value society's opinion over my heart again, I will leave you. Do you understand? I will not be a duke's dirty secret or a regretted entanglement. If we do this, it must be real, all of it, the good and the difficult and everything in between." "I understand," he said, "and I promise you, Eleanor, I will spend the rest of my life proving I have changed. I will be honest when it is hard. I will stand beside you when society disapproves. I will choose you over comfort and pride and every lesson I was taught about what a duke should be." She smiled then, a real smile, joyous and unguarded, and kissed him in front of half of Bath society with no care for propriety or consequence. When they finally separated, Winterbourne became aware of Ashford standing nearby. The man's expression was resigned but not bitter. "I hope," Ashford said quietly, "that you understand what you have been given, Your Grace. She is extraordinary." "I do," Winterbourne said, "and I will endeavor to deserve her." "See that you do." Ashford bowed to Eleanor. "I wish you every happiness." "Miss Hartley, truly." "Thank you, Mr. Ashford," Eleanor said gently. "You have been nothing but kind to me. I hope you find the happiness you deserve." He smiled, kissed her hand with old-fashioned courtesy, and withdrew. The room remained silent, shock slowly giving way to excited chatter. Lady Pemberton, standing near the refreshment table, caught Winterbourne's eye and raised her glass in a small, triumphant salute. Eleanor was still in his arms, and he was never letting her go. "Let me ask you something, dear viewer. When was the last time you were truly devastatingly honest about what you felt? Not the sanitized version you thought people wanted to hear, but the raw, messy truth. It takes courage, more courage than most of us realize." Winterbourne's public declaration was not romantic in a tidy way. It was vulnerable and frightening, and absolutely necessary. Sometimes love demands that we stop protecting ourselves and risk everything. Have you ever taken that risk? Would you, if the moment came? They left the assembly together, with Eleanor's aunt following at a discreet distance and Bath society buzzing behind them like disturbed bees. Winterbourne had offered his arm, and Eleanor had taken it, and they walked through the lamplit streets in a bubble of quiet joy that seemed removed from the rest of the world. "Where are we going?" Eleanor asked. "I have no idea," Winterbourne admitted. "I had planned everything up to the part where I declared my love in front of half of Bath. Beyond that, I confess I was uncertain." She laughed, the sound rich and free. "So you made a grand gesture with no thought to the practical consequences? That is very unlike you, Your Grace." "Julian," he corrected gently. "Please, Eleanor. Always Julian when we are together." "Julian," she repeated, and the sound of his name in her voice was everything he had imagined it would be. "You do realize you have created an enormous scandal. A duke publicly preventing another man's proposal. Bath will talk of nothing else for months." "Let them talk," he said, and meant it. "I have wasted enough of my life caring what Bath or London or anyone else thinks. The only opinion that matters to me is yours." They had reached the Royal Crescent, moonlight painting the curved facade in silver. Winterbourne stopped, turning to face her properly. I meant everything I said tonight. I love you. I want to marry you, if you will have me. But I will not rush you. I will not assume that because you chose me over Ashford, that you are ready to commit to a life together. I am asking you to take the time you need to be certain. Eleanor studied his face in the moonlight, her expression serious. And if I say I need a year, 2 years, if I say I must see proof of this change you claim before I will agree to marry you, then I will wait, he said simply. I will court you properly, with all the honesty and attention I should have shown from the beginning. And at the end of whatever time you require, if you still feel for me what I hope you do, I will ask you again. You would wait? Truly? Even knowing that society will speculate and gossip and question your intentions? Eleanor, he took her hands in his, feeling the warmth of them even through their gloves. I would wait forever if that is what you needed. I have spent 32 years in emotional solitude. I will happily spend however long it takes to prove I am worthy of ending that solitude with you. She was quiet for a long moment, her eyes searching his face. Then she said, Ask me. What? Ask me to marry you. Properly. Not in front of half of Bath, but here. Now. Just the two of us. His heart began to race. Are you certain? I am certain that I love you. I am certain that I have seen you struggle to change, to push past the walls your father built around your heart. I am certain that what you did tonight took more courage than anything I could have asked of you. She smiled. So ask me, Julian. Ask me to be your wife. He dropped to one knee there on the pavement, holding her hands in his heart so full he could barely speak. Eleanor Hartley, will you marry me? Will you accept this imperfect, foolish man who loves you beyond all reason? Will you let me spend the rest of my life learning to deserve the gift of your love? Yes, she said, pulling him to his feet. Yes, you impossible man. Yes, 1,000 times yes. He kissed her then, properly and thoroughly, with all the emotion he had, suppressed for weeks pouring into that single moment. When they finally separated, both breathing hard, Eleanor was laughing. We should probably tell my aunt before she expires from shock, she said. She has been remarkably patient, hovering at a distance while we conduct our courtship in the middle of the street. Winterbourne looked and saw Mrs. Hartley standing about 20 paces away, making a studied examination of the architecture while pretending not to notice them. Shall we? He offered his arm again. We shall. They walked back to where Eleanor's aunt waited, and Winterbourne felt lighter than he had in years. The road ahead would not be easy. There would be society's judgment to weather, old habits to break, new patterns of honesty and openness to establish. But Eleanor would be beside him, and that made everything else bearable. Mrs. Hartley, he said as they reached the older woman, I wonder if I might have a word about your niece's future. The aunt's eyes twinkled. I suspect, Your Grace, that my niece's future has already been rather definitively decided, but by all means, let us discuss the details. Inside, where Bath society is not watching through their windows. They went inside together, the Duke, the woman he loved, and the aunt who had apparently seen this coming all along, to plan a future that was finally, blessedly, real. Part 6. The Becoming. The scandal, as predicted, was magnificent. Within days, every drawing room in Bath and Harefair of those in London were discussing the Duke of Winterbourne's extraordinary public declaration. The gossip ranged from romanticized to salacious, with every variation in between. Some called it the most romantic gesture of the decade. Others darkly suggested Miss Hartley had entrapped a duke through calculated manipulation. Winterbourne, for perhaps the first time in his life, did not care. He was too busy learning how to be honest. It was harder than he had anticipated, a lifetime of careful. Control did not simply evaporate because one made a public declaration of love. He found himself constantly catching old habits, the impulse to retreat behind formality when emotions ran high, the instinct to maintain distance when closeness felt threatening, the tendency to use his title as a shield against genuine connection. Eleanor, to her credit, called him on it every time. You're doing it again, she would say, when he slipped into ducal pronouncements rather than honest conversation. Doing what? Hiding. Speaking to me as though I am an audience rather than the woman you claim to love. And he would have to stop, take a breath, and try again. would have to find the words that expressed what he actually felt rather than what seemed appropriate to say. It was exhausting. It was terrifying. It was also the most alive he had ever felt. They did not rush the wedding. Winterbourne wanted to bind Eleanor to him with every legal and religious tie society recognized before she could reconsider. But Eleanor insisted on time. Time for him to prove his changes were real and lasting. Time for her to be certain she could build a life with a man who was still learning how to be vulnerable. So they conducted a courtship that was unusual in its honesty and shocking in its disregard for proper form. They walked together through Sydney Gardens and discussed their fears. He told her about his father's coldness, about the loneliness of growing up in a house where emotion was considered weakness. She told him about the years after her father's death, about the humiliation of poverty, about the quiet desperation of knowing she would likely never marry for love. They argued about politics, about literature, about whether one could truly change the patterns of a lifetime or simply learn to manage them better. The arguments were fierce and honest, and they always ended with both of them understanding each other better than before. They laughed, discovering a shared sense of humor that skewed toward the absurd. Eleanor could make him laugh until tears ran down his face, and the sound of her laughter became his favorite music. And slowly, gradually, the distance between Your Grace and Julian disappeared entirely. One afternoon in late June, they sat together in Lady Pemberton's garden, their patroness having offered her home as a neutral meeting ground when propriety demanded supervision. Eleanor's aunt dozed in the shade, while Winterbourne and Eleanor walked among the roses. "I received a letter from your brother," Winterbourne said. Eleanor looked up sharply. "Edmund wrote to you? He wanted to know my intentions. I believe his exact words were, 'If you have not already proposed to my sister, I will have words with you upon my return.'" "That sounds like Edmund," she smiled. "What did you tell him?" "That I had proposed. You had accepted, and he could challenge me to pistols at dawn if he felt I was unworthy. I also mentioned that you are far more terrifying than any naval lieutenant could hope to be." Eleanor laughed. "I'm terrifying. Absolutely. You see through every defense I have. You call me to account when I retreat into old habits. You demand honesty when it would be easier to accept pretty lies. It's utterly terrifying and completely necessary." She took his hand, her fingers threading through his. "Are you happy, Julian?" "Truly." He considered the question seriously. Was he happy? He was vulnerable in ways that still frightened him. He was learning to express emotions he had suppressed for decades. He was facing the judgment of a society that found his choice of bride somewhere between eccentric and scandalous. "I am happier than I have ever been," he said honestly. "Frightened sometimes, uncertain often, but happy in a way I never knew was possible." "Good." She leaned her head against his shoulder. "Because I will not let you retreat into comfortable misery. If you are going to marry me, you will have to stay here in the messy reality of honest emotion. I would not have it any other way." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the bees among the roses and the distant sounds of Bath going about its business. "Have you thought about when?" Eleanor asked eventually. "When what?" "When we will actually marry. We have been engaged for 2 months, Julian. People are beginning to speculate that I am having second thoughts." "Are you?" The question came out more anxious than he intended. "No." She looked at him directly, her hazel eyes clear and certain. "I love you. I want to marry you. But I want to be sure you are ready. Really ready. Not because society expects it, but because you want to build a life with me." "I want that more than anything," he said. "But you were right to insist we wait. I needed the time to prove, to both of us, that I could sustain the changes I claim to have made." "And have you? Sustained them?" He thought about it carefully. "I have tried. I have failed more often than I would like, but I have kept trying, and I believe I am becoming someone who can be a true partner to you, rather than a distant aristocrat playing at connection." Eleanor smiled. "That is the most honest thing you have ever said to me." "Then perhaps I am ready. Perhaps we both are." They chose a date in September, early autumn when the summer heat had passed, but winter's chill had not yet arrived. The wedding would be in Bath at the Abbey, small enough to feel intimate but large enough to satisfy those who believed a duke's wedding should be a public affair. Eleanor's aunt cried when they told her. Edmund, recalled from his ship for the occasion, merely grunted and said, "About time." Lady Pemberton demanded the right to host the wedding breakfast and would not accept any refusal. And Winterbourne wrote to his estates, to his steward, to the various relations and connections that made up the complex web of ducal responsibility, and informed them all that he would be bringing home a duchess who had no fortune, no connections, and every quality that mattered. The responses were mixed. Some were supportive, others were coldly disapproving. A few suggested he had lost his mind. He found he did not care. The night before the wedding, Winterbourne could not sleep. He sat in his study at the Royal Crescent, a glass of brandy before him, and thought about the journey that had brought him to this point. From the cold, controlled Duke who had met Eleanor in a solicitor's office to the man who sat here now, trembling with anticipation and fear and overwhelming love. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. "Come." His valet entered, looking apologetic. "Your Grace, there is a lady. She insists on speaking with you. She says it is urgent." Winterbourne's heart leapt. "Show her in." But it was not Eleanor who entered. It was her aunt, looking grave. "Mrs. Hartley, is something wrong? Is Eleanor—" "Eleanor is well," the older woman assured him. "But I needed to speak with you before tomorrow, alone." He gestured to a chair, and she sat with the careful dignity of a woman who had known better circumstances. "I am going to be very direct, Your Grace. You are about to marry my niece. She loves you beyond all reason, and I believe you love her in return, but I need you to understand something." Winterbourne waited. Eleanor has known poverty, real poverty. She has known what it is to wonder where the next meal would come from, to mend the same dress over and over because there is no money for another, to understand that her future options were limited to becoming a governess or accepting charity from relations who made their generosity a burden. She has survived all of this with grace and strength and her dignity intact. Mrs. Hartley fixed him with a look that reminded him powerfully of Eleanor herself. "If you ever make her feel that she is less than you because of her birth or her lack of fortune, I will find a way to make you regret it. Duke or no Duke, do you understand me?" "I do," Winterbourne said quietly. "And I swear to you, Mrs. Hartley, I will spend every day of my life ensuring Eleanor knows her worth. Not because of what I have given her, but because of who she is." The older woman's expression softened. "You have changed, haven't you? The man Eleanor met in Pemberton's office would never have made such a promise. That man was a coward hiding behind a title. I am trying to be better. See that you keep trying." She rose to leave, then paused. "She asked me to give you this. She said you would understand." She handed him a folded piece of paper and departed before he could respond. Winterbourne unfolded the note with trembling hands. "Julian, tomorrow I will stand beside you and promise to love you for the rest of my life. I want you to know that I make that promise not with the blind optimism of someone who believes love conquers all, but with the clear-eyed certainty of someone who has seen you struggle and change and become more yourself than you have ever been. I love you, not the Duke of Winterbourne, though he comes with you, and I accept that, but Julian Ashworth, the man who quotes Wordsworth and makes me laugh and is learning to be brave in the ways that matter most. Tomorrow, when we speak our vows, I want you to remember something. I am not marrying you because you are a duke. I am marrying you because you finally stopped hiding behind that title and let me see the man underneath. That man, flawed and frightened and trying so hard to be better, is who I choose. Always. Sleep well, my love. Tomorrow we begin. Eleanor." He read it 3 times, then pressed it to his chest and let the tears come. Not tears of sorrow, but of gratitude and overwhelming relief. She saw him, truly saw him, and she chose him anyway. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and bright. Winterbourne dressed with more care than he had ever taken, his hands steady despite his racing heart. Edmund arrived to serve as witness, looking uncomfortable in formal dress but pleased despite himself. "Nervous?" the lieutenant asked. "Terrified," Winterbourne admitted. "Good. You should be. Marriage is terrifying." Edmund grinned. "But my sister is extraordinary, and you are damned lucky she agreed to have you." "I know." They walked together to the Abbey, where Bath society had gathered in force. Winterbourne saw faces he recognized, some approving, some scandalized, all intensely curious. Lady Pemberton sat in the front, beaming. Various relations he barely knew had made the journey to witness the spectacle. He saw none of them clearly, because Eleanor had just entered and she was radiant. She wore a gown of ivory silk, simple and elegant, with her hair dressed with small white flowers. She carried roses from Lady Pemberton's garden. She looked like herself, not like a duke's bride, not like someone trying to be something she was not, just like Eleanor, beautiful and certain, and walking toward him with love clear in her eyes. When she reached him, he took her hand and felt the rightness of it settle into his bones. The ceremony was traditional. They spoke the ancient words, made the eternal promises. Winterbourne's voice shook slightly when he said, "I will," but Eleanor's was steady and sure. When the vicar pronounced them married, Winterbourne kissed his wife with all the love and gratitude and wonder he had learned to feel. The congregation applauded, and someone, probably Lady Pemberton, could be heard crying with joy. But Winterbourne heard none of it. He was kissing Eleanor, his wife, his love, the woman who had taught him that vulnerability was not weakness, but the truest form of strength. The wedding breakfast was a lively affair, filled with toasts and laughter, and the kind of genuine joy that could not be manufactured or forced. Winterbourne danced with his wife, and felt as though he were floating, but his favorite. Moment came later, as the afternoon was fading and guests were beginning to depart. He found Eleanor standing alone on Lady Pemberton's terrace, looking out over the garden. "Mrs. Ashworth," he said softly. She turned, and her smile took his breath away. "Your Grace," he flinched. "Please don't." She laughed. "I'm teasing you, Julian. I will never call you my lord again unless I am very angry with you, and perhaps not even then." He came to stand beside her, taking her hand. "Are you happy?" "Deliriously, terrifyingly, completely. Those are interesting adverbs. We are an interesting couple." She leaned against him. "Where do we go from here?" "Wherever you wish. My estates, if you want to see them. London, if you prefer society. Or we could travel Italy, perhaps, or Scotland. I meant emotionally, you fool. Where do we go from here, Julian, now that we have made our promises and tied our lives together?" He considered the question seriously. "I suppose we continue learning. I continue trying to be honest, and you continue calling me to account when I fail. We build a life together that is real and messy and honest. That sounds exhausting." "It does, rather." "Good." She turned in his arms, looking up at him. "I would much rather have an exhausting, honest marriage than a comfortable, distant one, as would I." He kissed her forehead gently. "I love you, Eleanor Ashworth, and I love you, Julian. Not my lord, not your Grace, just Julian, always Julian." They stood together as the sun set over Bath, and Winterbourne thought of his father's cold lessons about emotional control, about the years he had spent in careful isolation, about the duke he had been when he first arrived in this city. That man seemed like a stranger now. This man, this husband, this person learning to be vulnerable and honest and open, felt more real than anything he had ever been before. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" "For refusing to call me anything but my lord, until I gave you a reason to stop, for seeing through my defenses, for being patient enough to wait while I learned how to change, for loving me anyway." Eleanor smiled. "You're welcome. But Julian, yes, I didn't change you. You did that yourself. I simply refused to accept less than your best self. Is there a difference? All the difference in the world." She took his hand. "Come. Lady Pemberton is signaling that dinner is ready, and I am famished." They went inside together, hand in hand, and Winterbourne thought that perhaps this simple act of moving through the world together, honest and open and unafraid, was what happiness actually meant. Not the grand gesture or the dramatic declaration, though those had their place, but the daily choice to be vulnerable, to be honest, to be present, to love and be loved, without hiding behind walls of propriety and pride. It was terrifying. It was everything. What have we learned from Julian and Eleanor's journey? First, that the walls we build to protect ourselves often become the very things that imprison us. Winterbourne's emotional distance, taught to him as strength, became his greatest weakness. Only when he risked vulnerability did he find genuine connection. Second, that love requires courage. Not the courage of dramatic gestures, though those have their place, but the daily courage of honesty, of saying what we feel, of admitting when we're wrong, of choosing connection over comfort. Third, that we are not defined by where we start, but by our willingness to change. Winterbourne was raised to be cold and distant. He could have remained that way, justified by his upbringing and society's expectations. Instead, he chose to become someone different. That choice, renewed daily, made all the difference. Fourth, that the small moments matter as much as the grand ones. Eleanor fell in love not because Winterbourne made a public declaration, but because he quoted Wordsworth in a library, because he listened when she spoke, because he tried and failed and tried again to be honest with her. And finally, that the people who love us best are often the ones who refuse to accept our lesser selves. Eleanor's greatest gift to Winterbourne was not her forgiveness, but her standards. She insisted he be better, do better, give more of himself than felt comfortable, and in rising to meet those standards, he became more fully himself. Now let me ask you directly, friend, what walls have you built? What parts of yourself? Do you hide behind formality or pride or fear? Who in your life deserves your honesty, your vulnerability, your best self, and hasn't been receiving it? The story of the Duke and Eleanor is fiction, yes, but the truth it contains is real. We all have our defenses. We all have our fears. We all have people we care for whom we keep at arm's length because closeness feels too dangerous. What would it look like to take the risk? To speak honestly? To show up fully rather than hiding behind whatever titles or roles or personas we've constructed? It won't be easy. Winterbourne's journey wasn't easy. But I would wager, and I think our story bears this out, that it would be worth it. Because in the end, the distance we create to protect ourselves becomes the very thing that keeps us from the connection we crave. Stop calling your loved ones by their titles, by the formal names and roles that keep them safely distant. Start calling them by their names, their real names, the ones that mean, I see you, I know you, you matter to me. And listen for the moment when they stop calling you by yours. That's when you'll know you've broken through. The end. Final reflections. Lessons for real life. This story, while set in a world of dukes and drawing rooms far removed from our own, carries truths that translate directly into our modern lives. Let's extract the practical wisdom we can apply starting today. On vulnerability and strength. Winterbourne's journey teaches us that true strength lies not in emotional invulnerability, but in the courage to be honest about what we feel. In our relationships, romantic, familial, or friendship, we often hide behind walls of I'm fine when we're not, of surface-level conversation when deeper connection calls. The strongest thing you can do is risk honesty, even when it feels like weakness. On presence over perfection. Eleanor didn't need Winterbourne to be perfect. She needed him to be present. In our busy lives, we often give people our divided attention, half listening while scrolling our phones, physically present but emotionally absent. The lesson: put down the device, make eye contact, remember what people tell you. True connection requires full presence, not perfect performance. On the power of standards, Eleanor's refusal to accept Winterbourne's lesser self was the greatest gift she could give him. In your relationships, maintain your standards, not in a punishing way, but in a loving insistence that the people in your life show up fully and allow others to hold you to theirs. We rise to meet the expectations of those who truly love us. On the daily choice. Change is not a single dramatic moment, but a series of small daily choices. Winterbourne had to choose honesty every single day, catching himself when he reverted to old patterns. Whatever change you're trying to make in your life, being more present, more honest, more open, understand it's a practice, not a destination. You'll fail sometimes. What matters is that you keep choosing. On pride and connection, Winterbourne's pride nearly cost him everything. Pride tells us we should be self-sufficient, that needing others is weakness, that admitting fault is failure. But pride is often just fear in fancy clothing. The people who love us don't need us to be infallible. They need us to be real. Let go of the need to always be right, always be strong, always have it together. The cracks are where the light gets in. On words and actions, the most powerful. Lesson: caring without action is just another form of silence. It's not enough to feel love, gratitude, appreciation. We must express it. We must show it through consistent action. Tell the people you love that you love them. Show up when you say you will. Follow through. Make the phone call, write the message, don't assume they know. Say it anyway. On timing. Winterbourne almost waited too long. We often think we have more time than we do to heal rifts, to say what matters, to choose connection. Overpride. Don't wait for the perfect moment, the perfect words, the ideal circumstances. Speak while you still can. Choose while the choice is still yours to make. Finally, on the distance. We create. The story's title captures its core truth. When Eleanor stopped calling him my lord, Winterbourne finally heard the distance he had created. What are your my lords? What formalities, what careful distances, what protective barriers have you constructed between yourself and genuine connection? And more importantly, are you ready to let them fall? The answer doesn't have to be yes right now. Change takes time. But perhaps this story can be the beginning of your own journey toward greater honesty, deeper connection, and the courage to be vulnerable with the people who matter most. Because in the end, we're all just Julian and Eleanor. All of us stumbling toward connection. All of us carrying wounds that make vulnerability terrifying. All of us needing someone to see past our defenses to the person underneath. The question is, will you let them? Will you take the risk? Will you stop hiding behind your title, whatever that title might be, and let yourself be known? I hope you will. And I hope this story, with all its period drama and aristocratic setting, has reminded you of something true, that love, real love, requires us to be brave in the small moments, honest in the daily choices, and willing to be seen, truly seen, by another person. That's the real romance. Not the ball gowns or the grand estates, but the choice made over and over to show up honestly and let yourself be loved. Thank you for spending these 2 hours with Julian and Eleanor. May their journey inspire your own.